to the best college football show on the internet. I'm Travis Justice, and this is Behind the Point Spread, brought to you by Betfred Sports. If you want to chime in on tonight's show, it's very easy to do. All you have to do is give us a phone call at 402-543-5556. Again, 402-543-5556. We are without a producer tonight. That's right. Producer Owen, the visionary for this whole thing, decided to go to a concert tonight, and so we have it on auto screen. Just to let you know, if you do call, you're going to be prompted by an AI voice, and you can just leave your name, and we'll get you right on the air. But again, 402-543-5556. Let's bring in the stars of the show, shall we? Scott Spreitzer, who's right next to me, and at the bottom of your screen, checking his phone. And have you cracked open a beer yet, Dr. Rob?
I'm checking my phone. I'm looking up like bull whips to buy.
Bull whips.
Bull whips.
Scott, we brought Scott into that conversation on the latest Doc Talk podcast presented by Betfred Sports. Of course, we talked about college football, but bull whips came up, Scott. And when you were a kid growing up in Bellevue, did you ever have a bull whip and able to snap it? You were able to crack the whip?
Never had a bull whip. You know, we were like the most, probably the furthest away that you could think of what people would stereotype as growing up in Nebraska is. I've never hunted in my life. I fished once. You know, I mean, it's just like it's crazy because we didn't fit the mold, so to speak. And I've got friends who are out here now in Vegas who are from different parts of Nebraska that are like, "Hey, let's go up to Northern Nevada and hunt this, that, or the other." And I'm like, "Sorry, dude, never done it." They're like, "Let's scout the area." I'm like, "Scout the area? What are you talking about?" And so they all look at me funny. They kind of hate me and all that kind of stuff. So. But no, back to your original question. I've never actually held a bullwhip, seen a bullwhip in real life. I don't know what to tell you.
Why do you hate Indiana Jones?
There you go. I forgot about Indiana
Raiders of the Lost Ark was a great movie.
Fantastic series.
And as we found out during the podcast, Rob dressed up like 2 or 3 straight years as Indiana Jones. Can you imagine Rob as Indiana Jones at Halloween?
I was a very large Indiana Jones. Now, keep in mind, I was in like 4th grade at the time.
You were more like, you remind me of that German guy in Raiders of the Lost Ark who tried to hide him underneath the plane.
Who gets shredded by the propeller.
Yeah.
That guy just died, by the way, like this past year.
Really? I did not know that.
Actor just passed away. So I keep up with my Raiders of the Lost Ark cast.
Rob with more useless information than one brain can actually hold. So
I prefer esoteric information.
There you go.
I like that. The best ride at Disneyland for us, my daughter and I, is Indiana Jones. So there you go.
Well, that's I don't think I've ridden that one. I need to get out to Disneyland. It's been a while. If you want to work with Scott Spreitzer directly, and after watching tonight's show, you're going to want to. I promise you that. Text the word Doc Talk to the number 29022 and get a free $60 trial of premium member picks from Scott. Or you can visit docsports.com and sign up for the free 60 on the upper left hand of the website. Betfred has a couple of bonuses for you. The pro football bonus: place a game day wager on any pro football first touchdown score, and you'll get paid out 2 times the odds in cash if your bet wins and the player scores a second touchdown. All you have to do is go to the promo section and enter the promo code SCORE. If that doesn't tickle your fancy, how about the parlay bonus? A lot of people like to bet those parlays. When you place 9 football parlays, the 10th parlay is on Fred. Get rewarded with up to a $100 Fred bet each week of the pro football season. Again, go to the bonus section and use the promo code parlay. Scott, you went deep into the metrics tonight. Of course, each week we've been talking about a metric that you tend to look at when it comes to doing your handicapping and doing your power rankings and things like that. And tonight is no different. I like this one. This one's very easy to understand, and it's the net points per drive.
Or as you've typed it here, the net ponnets per drive.
My dyslexia kicked in. So thanks for catching that, Rob. I appreciate that.
It's the esoteric way of spelling points.
Exactly. It's a Vegas thing. That's how they it's the French spelling.
Do you pronounce the T? Anyway, having said all of that, I thought I was saying last week we've been going on with all this crazy calculus and stuff like that, and I thought it would be good to give something that's a tool, but a basic tool when it comes to the handicapping portion of college football. And there's only like one metric that I've talked about thus far, and it was a few weeks ago, where you look at that, you can almost base your playoff with that one metric. All of these kind of fit together, and they play their part in the role of trying to find a team that you think is going to beat the spread that particular weekend. So this is not something that I would say, okay, you use this, and I'm going to explain it in just a second. And if one team has a net points per drive, rating that's much higher than the other, then you lay the 20 points. It's not that kind of a simple and basic metric. It's just another tool that combines with others to give you a better chance of winning. A lot of times these tools, what they do for me is they keep me off bad plays. And they'll keep me off a team I should have, you have no business of betting. And so it saved me a lot of money in that sense, which is obviously just about as important as winning money. But so simply what this is, as the folks can see there on their screen, it is the difference between points scored per offensive drive for a team and points allowed per opponent's offensive drive. And that's what it's FBS teams against FBS teams. It's got to be non-garbage time. So if a team's up 49-0 with 2 minutes to go and they score points or their opponent scores points, that stuff's all taken out of the equation. And it's regulation possessions also, not the goofy overtime rules factored in. And what I did is what you do basically is, an example would be Michigan. They average 4.34 points per offensive drive in the parameters that I just mentioned, and they allow an opposing offense to score 0.55 points per drive. So you subtract 0.55 or the defensive number from 4.34, the offensive number, and they come up with 3.79 net points per drive. And the reason I used Michigan is because they're number one in the country in this metric. And you can see right there again on your screen. Check out teams 2 through 10. That's 0.67 difference between number 2 and number 10. And then look where Michigan is. Nobody's living in the world right now. And, we can sit there and we can hammer out whether we think it's because the schedule hasn't been tough and maybe other teams have played tougher schedules. The bottom line is nobody is in their league right now when it comes to net points per drive. And you'll see at the bottom of the screen there, I put where Iowa State and our beloved Nebraska Cornhuskers are with this metric and why they've arrived where they are.
So Scott, a couple of questions here for you. And I guess kind of the big one is that, when you look at these metrics, because I know one of the teams that kind of routinely keeps popping up here in the top 5 of all of these metrics week in and week out is Washington.
Right.
And that's a team you pointed out, I mean, 3 or 4 weeks ago on this show, you pointed out how they were showing up even that early in the season on a number of kind of some of the really strong metrics that you use. How much, when you look at these metrics, how much does it matter who they're playing? I would look at like the Big Ten and it's, man, talk about a 3-team on the surface, at least. It looks like a 3-team conference. It really does.
Sure.
And I've seen teams like Iowa that look horrible offensively go against some very, very good Big Ten teams over the years. And you still have maybe they lose like 24-21 in a game that you think they're going to get blown out of. But right now, the Big Ten looks like a 3-team conference. How much do you put on Michigan or Penn State with where they're at right now, or even Ohio State? They're still in the top 10. How much do you put on Washington and say, okay, well, they truly haven't played a tough schedule? Do you look at Georgia where they're sitting at 6th and say, is this one of these metrics that you look at and go, okay, well, Georgia's 6th in this particular metric or a number of metrics, and say, okay, you know what, that they may not have that higher metric, but they're playing a tougher schedule than anybody else, and we'll see that when the playoff rolls around? Or do you look at these metrics and look at Michigan and say, okay, you know what, the opponents matter, but maybe not that much? Does that make sense as far as the question? How much does the opponent play into this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And for this particular metric, because it removes the garbage time scores, whether it be field goal, touchdown, safety, doesn't matter. It removes the garbage time for the scores. And because it does that, it doesn't completely balance out, a team playing ultra tough schedule against a team playing a cream puff schedule, but it does help a little bit in gauging that. I mean, Michigan could have beaten Nebraska by more points than they did. They dialed it down. They could have probably, UNLV's had one loss this year, was against Michigan. They dialed it down against UNLV. At the time, it was, I think, 35-0, and the final was 35-7. So, it does, when you factor in non-garbage time, that becomes more important. The fact that Michigan was up 35-0 on UNLV before it became garbage time, that kind of factors into that equation and takes away the softness of the opponent a little bit. Not completely, but enough to kind of give you a taste of it all. And, like you see Air Force 7th in the country. Air Force is a good football team, but you also have to keep in mind that's relative to where the Mountain West rates out compared to the rest of the country. And again, with Georgia, I give them a pass for the most part because they're there every single year. And we know what Georgia brought a couple of weeks ago when they finally had so-called big game and they just blew the doors off Kentucky. So that team gets my trust, whether they've done it against the softest teams in college football or the toughest teams in college football.
I guess my question would be, where Michigan's sitting right now at 3.79, is that high for this for this metric? Or what do you see as kind of an average over the course of years?
Yeah, if you look at, for instance, like last year's championship game is a good example. Georgia was number one, and they were in that Michigan neighborhood that Michigan is right now, and they played TCU. And TCU was way down the list. I mean, they weren't outside the top 30, but they were way down the list when it came to their metric, when it came to net points per drive. But their defense was like 28. Again, not bad, but not championship game worthy, as far as I'm concerned. And so Georgia was in the mix towards the end of the season of where Michigan is right now. And that's pretty good company. Now, again, we got to sit there and watch and see what Michigan does. They have a 2-game schedule. They've got Penn State and Ohio State. But again, it's one of those things, because you take out all that garbage stuff, garbage time, that I think that kind of levels it a little bit. So it's not crazy, like outside the line, so to speak. But again, it's one of those things that it's good. What it's going to do for me, like on a something like this, is it's going to keep me off laying points. And I don't want to pick on them because they're my favorite college football team. I'm not normally going to lay a bunch of points or more than a field goal with Nebraska, because look at what they've done on their net. They're 74th in the country. This year they're playing a team that's much further down, or this week, much further down the list than Nebraska. But again, you're talking about having to lay double digits with a team that can't get out of its own way sometimes on the offensive side of the line of scrimmage. So it does keep you off of certain teams. There are just certain teams on this. Like if you're outside the top 60, you're rarely going to see me laying more than 3 or 4 points with the team if I lay points at all in that game.
Makes a lot of sense. Go ahead, Rob.
I was just going to ask, are there any of these metrics that you look at? And I mean, you talk about this and it makes sense to me where you mention it. It's like, listen, it's not an end all be all, but it's definitely a tool in the toolbox. Are there any of these metrics that you look at? And like I said, we've looked at several here over the last month and a half. Are there any that are sort of like, oh yeah, if a team's meeting this one, they're getting my money?
Yeah, the closest I would say would be the one that we were talking about a few weeks ago. And it's kind of an efficiency thing. It's, did you gain half the yards you needed on first down to get the next first down? And, if it's 2nd and 4, did you gain at least 2 yards, and so on? And that judges everything by drive charts over the course of an entire game. And then, of course, over the entire season as it accumulates. And so to me, that tells me consistency on both sides of the line of scrimmage more than anything else, at least for what I like to look at. And you're also talking about the defensive efficiency of that metric. So if you're holding your team to less than half the yards they need every time they need to pick up a first down, and you're gaining half the yards or more every time you need a first down on offense, that's a heck of a metric. And that's going to get me 100%. I'm either on that team or staying away from that game. I mean, at least 99.8% of the time. So I think that's the best metric if you're only looking at one of the metrics we've talked about.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
That does make a lot of sense. Hey, if you want to phone the show and ask Scott and Dr. Rob a question, 402-543-5556. That's the number to call. If you just want to leave comments, especially if you're on Facebook and YouTube, just leave it in the comment section about any game you see. You can ask about any game. We're doing 4 tonight, but you can ask about any game because, well, Scott's got all those games at the just right at his fingertips, so he can answer a lot of those questions. Speaking of the 4 games, tonight we are going to take a look at the Ole Miss Auburn game. We're going to look at the Penn State Ohio State game. That game, that's a huge game in the Big Ten. The Minnesota Iowa game is the battle for Floyd of Rosedale, and Nebraska is at home this weekend to play Northwestern. The battle of the different ends. That's what it comes down to. The battle of the different ends.
It's so like the different ends and the different NUs.
Yes,
it's so NW versus NU. By the way,
let's start with the a game in the Southeastern Conference. Ole Miss at Auburn. This is intriguing to me because Lane Kiffin, many people believe, could have had the Auburn job if he wanted it. The Rebels are going to go to Auburn as a 6.5-point favorite with the point total at 55.
Probably took a look at that quarterback room and said, no, thanks, I'm going to stay with put. My gosh, this Auburn offense, I mean, especially the passing, it's an abject disaster right now on offense. I mean, the quarterback situation isn't good. And if you take games against Samford and UMass out of the mix this year for Auburn, I'll go to my notes here. I had to make some notes on this. They've averaged 98 yards passing in those other 4 games on 4.5 yards per pass. Horrible. 51.7% completion rate. They ran in those 4 games for 4.1 yards per carry. Not horrible, but not good. And the teams they faced, Cal, Georgia, LSU, A&M. LSU's defense, nothing to write home about. Cal, certainly nothing to write home about. We know how poorly that LSU defense has performed at times this year, but the most telling thing about this offense for me was that California game. And I took Cal plus the points, and they hung on and they covered. Should have won that game. They lost to Auburn 14-10, but at least they covered. But I'm going back and I'm looking at the Cal stats as I'm prepping for this game the other night. And Cal, they're 96th against the pass in the country. They're 73rd against the run. They allow 31 points per game, yet they held Auburn to 12 first downs, 230 yards on 4.9 yards per play, not per carry, but per play. That's horrible. So to beat Ole Miss, you got to be able to pass the football. And, they're kind of permissive against the pass, pretty good against the run. But Auburn can't throw the football. At least they haven't yet with any consistency. Under 100 yards per game against their toughest 4 opponents. And It's up. I mean, who likes to lay 6.5 on the road in the SEC and against a team like Auburn, who's usually in the mix? But this year, things are looking tough down there. I think Ole Miss covers this number.
Oh, really? Even going on the road?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be a personal play, a personal service play or a premium play. But if we're just talking about opinions here, I think a good, 8 to 10 point win by Ole Miss in this one. And again, it's not going to make my final list of 7 or 8 plays, but it's an opinion. It's like probably that close to making my list.
Next game up is going to be the big one in the Big Ten. This is Penn State at Ohio State, and it's Saturday at 11 o'clock on Fox. Ohio State, this was at 4 this afternoon. It jumped up to 4.5 right before we went on the air, at least on Betfred. The over-under at 45.5. Why does that number seem low on the total to me, Scott?
I don't know. I'm not on the total at all. So, I can see where these two teams trade points. I mean, they scored 75 last year, right, up in Happy Valley. So I get where you're coming from there. I just, I made the total 46.5. So I'm kind of right there and decided I'm not going to even look at the total after seeing how close it was to the actual total. But what got my attention, first of all, and then you got to decide if there's cause for this big of an adjustment. Last year in Happy Valley, and of course, C.J. Stroud was the quarterback, and he's finding success so far with D'Amico Ryans in Houston in the NFL. That line was 15.5. Ohio State favored on the road. Now they're back home. They're at the shoe and they're laying 4.5. So you got to start, I think you start out by saying, is there enough of a difference between this Buckeye team and last year's and Penn State last year and this year for an 11-point adjustment in a home venue for the Buckeyes? And I've been trying to wrap my head around that a little bit. And I know, Ohio State's been taking a little bit of a rap by the sports media. They're not as good as they were. I know I've kind of ripped Ryan Day a couple of times, but that's probably is more for his personality than it was his coaching ability when we talk about him. But again, you're looking at McCord, early in the season for Ohio State, he threw an interception game 1 against Indiana. Wasn't crazy about his play. I think we talked about it a little bit. I'm like, boy, I'm not sold on this kid after the first game or two. He hasn't thrown a pick since game one. He's got 11 touchdowns and 1 pick. And so he's been taking care of the football, not making costly mistakes. And I know he had a kind of a funky game against Notre Dame. That's a pretty good team, as Kayla Thompson found out at USC last week. But the Buckeyes' ground game leaves a lot to be desired. That's what scares me here. Penn State, you look at what they've done. They've not played really anybody of note as of yet, but they did do well against a very good Iowa Hawkeyes defense, and they were able to run the ball for the most part against that defense. And I think you got to throw that into the mix. Drew Allard, their quarterback, he hasn't thrown a pick all year. He's got 12 touchdown passes. So they ran for 215 against Iowa. It wasn't great. It was like 3.8, 3.9 yards per pop. But again, it was against a very good run defense. I get a little worried whenever I want to think about plunking down money on James Franklin, because everybody knows he has not done well in big games. I'm going to back the Buckeyes here and say they find a way to win this one by a touchdown. I think it should be a very exciting football game. The total, man, Travis, if you like it over, have at it. You know, I'm just totally not clued into this total. I don't generally play a lot of college football totals, but mine's only 1 point higher than the actual total is at the book, so I decided to pass that. But I do like Ohio State. I think they come through here. Again, I think that adjustment's a little too big. Am I going to be shocked if Penn State jumps out to a 2-touchdown lead, maybe a pick six and a great drive, and all of a sudden the Buckeyes are fighting to get back into it? They only win by a field goal. They lose by a field goal. I'm not. But again, as far as that point spread, I just think it's a little bit of an over adjustment.
Before we move on to our next game, Tom writes in on YouTube, and he wants to know if you have any thoughts on the OU-UCF game. This will be interesting with the OU quarterback, former UCF player. But OU's been kind of the surprise. I'm shocked at what he's been able to coach this year and where they're sitting, especially after that win against Texas.
A lot of points. I don't have the screen in front of me right now, but it's about 18 or so. Oklahoma, the favorite there. The one thing about Gus Malzahn, when he loses a game, he normally comes back and covers, and it's a pretty phenomenal record. It's like 16-7 in that neighborhood against the spread. So I'm always leery of a Gus Malzahn coach team that maybe looked bad in their previous game, and then the over adjustment when they step up and level a competition, the over adjustment on the line. So for me, it would be a small lean. It's, again, not a personal play for me, but it would be a small lean on taking the points with Malzahn in Central Florida. Oklahoma's got some nice numbers. They fit that metric we talked about pretty well for the most part. I just don't know if I trust them yet. And I had them against Texas a few weeks ago. I thought it was a good spot.
I'm texting Travis during that Oklahoma-Texas game. I was like, God damn, Scott's right.
He was the whole time. Like, Spreitzer's the smartest guy I know.
Well, he should have been with me last Sunday when I had a bad day in the NFL for the first time in 3 or 4 weeks, because I had Mac Jones as my top play, Rob, and I don't know if you saw it for the Patriots. I'm getting 3. They're down by 2. There's about 90 seconds to go, and he takes a sack in the end zone to move that final difference to 4, and I get beat by a point. Fortunately, my kid was in town, and I'm running around town, and we're like doing our food tour in Chinatown, as we always do when she's here. But I get about 1 million texts from all my, my little sports betting group, and you can't believe what happened in this game. Oh my gosh. I was like, yeah, I'll watch it later. I saw what happened on my app, But I wanted to say real quickly, I should have wrote down his name. One of your listeners, real cool guy, and he tweeted me last week. I think it was Saturday evening, and I didn't see it until Sunday morning. He goes, "Hey, Scott, I need a really good week in the NFL. What do you think?" And I did see it later on that day when I got home from having my kid in town for the weekend. And I just said to him, I go, "Man, I'm sorry." I go, "We just had our first losing NFL Sunday in 4 weeks. We'd swept the previous 3 weeks." And all he did was, is like, he clicked the like button. There were no insults. There were no, what are you doing wearing a Florida State jersey? None of that kind of stuff. So.
We'll get to that. Yeah. Next game up is going to be the battle for Floyd of Rosedale. Minnesota coming off a bye week. The Gophers are down this year. Iowa coming off a huge, huge win. And I mean, huge just for the program. It wasn't a pretty win by any means. If you like defensive football, it was a good game to watch. Iowa, Wisconsin. But the Hawks are home. NBC game, 2:30, a 3.5-point favorite. The total here is shocking to me. 31.5. 31.5. I'm taking the under all day in this thing, man.
I think there was a first half team total when Rob was playing offensive line at Nebraska. I
think it was too.
Over 31.5 in the first half. I mean, that's just crazy stuff. They opened 5.5. They're down to 3.5. The Hawkeyes total, as you mentioned, 31.5. I mean, this is Hank Iba's special, isn't it? I mean, this is like first team to 8 or something like that. And then they play 4 corners. But anyway, the Gophers, I think they're going to have a tough time topping 10 points. They've got a 55% passer who has got as many interceptions as he does touchdowns. The weapon they have is, of course, Darius Taylor, pretty good running back, but he hasn't played since September 23rd. Last check a couple hours ago, he was listed as questionable. But again, this team is 130th in yards passing per game. So if they can't get any kind of ground game going, I think Iowa's defense eats them up. And again, if Taylor plays again, I think it's going to be hard for him to run the ball like he was earlier in the season against this defense. And always we talk about this great defense that could probably, if it had any kind of offense in the top 40 in some metrics, could beat most teams in college football. We have to bring up that they're 133rd, Iowa, in total yards per game on offense. There are 133 FBS teams. They're 133rd in the nation when it comes to that stat. Last week, 9 first downs. Are you kidding me? 37 yards passing. Outside of an 82-yard run 3 minutes into the game, they had 155 yards in the other 57 minutes on 2.5 yards per carry. I mean, there's guys falling down at the line of scrimmage, gaining 3 yards. I just thought that was crazy. Anyway, 13-10 last year, I could see another score in that neighborhood. I'll say 13-7 Hawkeyes. They get the cover. Game stays under the total. It's almost getting to that point where it is so low and it looks so obvious that nobody's going to score that they somehow combine for 45 points. But I'll say Iowa wins by 6.
Oh, Jesus. You're making my Saturday just long, right? But, Iowa fans, because I host the Iowa Hawkeye post-game show, they've come now to realize that if they win, that's the only thing that matters. A win's a win, and that's true. But, man, if you had an offense that was 80th in the country, they would be legit. I mean, they would be good. It's just hard. It's hard to just watch really bad offensive football. That's for sure.
What's Iowa? They're 5-1. 6-1.
Yeah,
they're going to be 7-1 after this week. And Minnesota's a terrible team.
Well, here's the only thing I worry about. If I know we have some Iowa fans watching tonight too, is that you're coming off a big win at Camp Randall. Is there an emotional letdown? Eric All, your tight end. You're down 2 tight ends now. Luke Lachey got hurt against Western Michigan. Eric All tore his ACL. He's out for the rest of the season. So, I mean, they don't use wide receivers for some reason. Is there a letdown emotionally, and are they just trying to get to that bye week? What does that look like for them? But they need to get to that bye week.
But I mean, for both of these teams, I mean, I would think it'd be for Iowa as well. I mean, definitely Minnesota. It's an old school rivalry.
Yes.
Game. I mean, you can make fun of it. Some of these old Big Ten rivalries are real. And I mean, if you know Iowa people, I mean, there's as much as Nebraska would love to have a rivalry with Iowa, it's Minnesota and Wisconsin.
Well, now
you've got back-to-back. You got the Minnesota win. Go get Wisconsin. And I mean, if they beat Wisconsin, for most Iowa fans, the season's made.
It was last week, especially winning on the road in Camp Randall. The emotional win and then Minnesota coming off a bye week is intriguing to me. But I'm kind of with Scott. I think it's going to be low scoring. It's going to be ugly. It's just going to be, an ugly football.
Well, the ugly I agree with. It's Iowa.
Yeah. I don't disagree with you at all. How about
can I say something real quick though, Travis? Yeah. Because you talked about, the tight end situation, the injury, and he's a damn good tight end. I mean, obviously tight ends, they know what they're doing with Iowa when it comes to developing tight ends. We've seen that in the NFL. The only issue is like I say to some people, if you're averaging 15 points and you got a great tight end and he's missing, what does that mean? You're going to hit 14? I mean, it's like, if they're averaging 30 points per game and he's missed a red zone and he's moving chains when they get inside the opponent's 30, let's say, and then in the 20 in the red zone and he's catching touchdown passes, all right, they're averaging 27 points per game. He really becomes a factor. But when you're averaging, 14, 15 points per game, it's like there's not that big of a drop-off left to go when you're missing
fair.
A player or two.
That's fair. Another bad offense, Nebraska, and the statistics at least tell you that, taking on another bad team in the Big Ten, but one that has beaten Minnesota. It's Northwestern against Nebraska, 2:30 Saturday on BTN. Nebraska double-digit favorite at 11.5, over-under here at 41.
Yeah, if you go back to that net points per drive, you'll see that Nebraska, again, was 74th. The defense was around 30th. I'm spacing off the exact number, but around 30th. The offense was 116th in net points per drive. Northwestern, their offense is actually net points per drive is better than Nebraska's. They're 103rd. But the reason they're so far down the list behind Nebraska is because the defense is 92nd. So Nebraska has a huge advantage if they play to their talent and play, for the most part, what they've done this year outside of that Michigan game on the defensive side of the football. They should handle Northwestern. I'm going to make one guarantee. I never do guarantees. I'll make one guarantee right now. Nebraska does not onside kick up 11 if they're up 11 in this game. I'm going to tell you that right now. I don't think that's going to be in the playbook for Matt Rule. He might have removed that one from Scott Frost's playbook. But as far as the game is concerned, this number's dropped, man. The money's been coming in on Northwestern. Nebraska was as high as 13.5. As you see, it's down to 11.5 right now. Northwestern, when I look at this team and what they can do defensively, I don't think they can bother Nebraska too much. This is going to be about Nebraska's execution offensively. If they execute and they don't turn the ball over, they should win this game and possibly cover that spread win by 13, 14 points. The one thing about Harburg, listen, he's not accurate. He's a 52% passer. Let's call it like it is. Sims was hitting 58, 59%, but Harburg doesn't make bad decisions with the football too often. If you look at the passes he's thrown, he's averaging 1 interception every 48 passes. Nebraska throwing the ball 48 times is what? Three games worth if they have their choice. So he's making 1 bad pass being picked off per 48 passes, where Sims, who's a 58, 59% passer, was basically throwing an interception 1 interception for every 8.5 pass attempts. And that's where Nebraska's being able to win games. He doesn't make costly mistakes often. But I look at that rushing stat. Nebraska, 200 yards per game. They only give up 76. Most of the average came against Michigan, that 76. Northwestern's as lopsided as it gets. They're upside down. 103 rushing yards per game. They allow 172. Execute in the trenches. Nebraska wins by a couple touchdowns.
Wow. And you just made a lot of Husker fans happy, that's for sure. We've got some couple comments coming in. Eric writes in, and he wants to know Wisconsin -2.5 at Illinois. Illinois went to Maryland last week and won. That one shocked me. A lot to think about on this one. What's your take?
I was surprised by that win on the road after the way they looked against Nebraska the prior week. But in this game, my suggestion, if I was going to play it, would be to take the points. Luke Fickell goes into Madison. We talked about the caveat before the season started in that he's changing the culture. He's changing the identity that Barry Alvarez brought to Wisconsin all those years ago. It ain't so easy. Just ask, the coaches that came after Frank Solich at Nebraska. When you change your identity, you could be asking for trouble, and maybe it pays off with a better quarterback a year from now, 2 years from now. But right now, they're not understanding this new offensive coordinator and what he's trying to do. So a lot of people are, Fickell, great hire. He's going to be top 10 this year in his first year at Wisconsin, and listen, he's a good coach. We know that, but he's completely changing a program's identity of 20 years, since Alvarez first got there, more than that. And I think you got to be careful when you're talking about backing a team that's already shown that they can be had and have not figured this new offense out. So if it was up to me, if I was going to play it, if I had to play it, I would back Illinois here.
It's interesting, Rob, because he brought up, replacing Solich and what that meant for Nebraska. Barry Alvarez always had his thumbprint on the program, and it performed well with everybody they had, maybe with the exception of Gary Anderson.
Gary Anderson won. He was great at Wisconsin.
But I don't know if he liked the thumbprint that Barry Alvarez
had. Nobody
on the
liked it. That's why Bielema left.
Yeah.
Right? That's why Gary Anderson left. All those guys, they had great records there. Yep. They didn't like the fact that the AD was still the head football coach.
I'll use Kansas State as another example. When Bill Snyder retired, people probably want to remember this name. Remember when Ron Prince came in for a couple of years?
He was a Virginia guy.
Yeah, came in, coached a couple of years, and that was a disaster. Bill Snyder had to come back. I think Kleiman and Snyder see eye to eye on there. I mean, they do things a little differently, but I think the culture is very, very similar. So you're right, Scott. Changing a culture can be detrimental to a program, especially as proud as Wisconsin is. We got another question.
Look at identities at different levels. Look at the Pittsburgh Steelers. That team's had the same identity basically since Chuck Noll.
Yeah.
Cowher. Obviously, what they've got now is one of my favorite head coaches in all of football, and Mike Tomlin. No matter what level you're talking about, the guy just wins more than he loses every single year.
They've had 3 coaches since what, 69?
Yeah.
Yes, and it's all that same identity. It's hard-nosed, smash-mouth football. Let's get a quarterback. Terry Bradshaw had miserable stats sometimes in a season, and so they've kept that kind of identity. We saw it in the NHL when Billy Smith was playing in net all those years ago for the Islanders. Same identity every year, and they kept going to the Stanley Cup Finals every year. You change a culture, you change an identity. Boy, I'm telling you, you're really asking for trouble, I feel. And I thought if Fickell came in there and he could have made baby steps as far as changing the culture, but he brings in this offensive coordinator who wants to go on offense. And then he brings in a quarterback who I thought was probably at his peak level of where he should be playing, at what level he should be playing before he transferred to Wisconsin. It's a different animal in the Big Ten than some of the teams SMU plays. And so doing all of this at once, I just thought was a little bit of a mistake. And, maybe they'll figure it out and they'll go on to win 9 or 10 games this year. But right now they're 4-2 and they were expected to be 6-0.
Vince writes in and says, what are your thoughts? Ooh, I like that emoji too. That's almost downright frightening. Tennessee versus Bama -9, 48.5.
If he's talking about the side, I like Bama here. If he's talking about the total, I'm a small lean towards the over in this game. We saw all those points put up between these two teams previous meetings. But the way I have Alabama rated, I've got them in some of those metrics that I have talked about over the last few weeks. Relatively speaking, a decent amount ahead of Tennessee. And I think Bama's going to be able to get the job done and probably win this game by 2 touchdowns. I've only been on Bama like once or twice this year, been picking the spots, and one of those was against A&M. And I think they come out there and they play a pretty dominant game here. Not going to blow Tennessee off the field. They've got good talent, but the bottom line is I think a 2-touchdown win is in the offing.
Got a couple more coming in, then we'll wrap it up. Tom comes back, says, why is Rutgers only a 5-point favorite over Indiana? I like Indiana.
I was going to say, I like that kind of a question, because why are they only a 5-point favorite? I like Indiana, which means this guy's obviously thinking like a better. It's almost like, okay, the books make this 5. I think it should be probably 7. Something's off here. Now, you can't just, base a bet off of that feeling, because bookmakers will tell you there's really no traps, but it feels like it should be higher. I lean towards Indiana with him. We've seen Rutgers. Greg Schiano, I thought when he came back was going to have more success than he has. And we haven't been able to see this team be consistent enough, I think, on offense, and especially in the trenches, to be able to warrant beating a team by 7 points and putting your money on it. So, and basically at 5, you got to win by a touchdown. Lean towards Indiana. I hate to do this again, but it's one of those games that won't be on my premium card this week. Just an opinion.
So never make assumptions by watching this show, because I know it's a college football show. In fact, as Dr. Rob likes to say, it's the best college football show on the internet. But NUGPA makes an assumption, says, I realize you're not a baseball guy. Hold on. We've never said that Scott's not a baseball guy, because I think Scott is a baseball guy, bets a lot of baseball. But he says, what's up with everything being plus 1.5 runs or under with the VIG adjustment? I can't make sense of it.
I'm not sure I'm understanding the question. Well, first of all, you're right, Travis. I handicap baseball every single day. Every single day. I might not bet every single day, but I bet probably 90% of baseball days.
Wow.
And I'm not sure I understood the question, because money, you can still play money lines every day. Or unless he's saying, why is every game a blowout and covering the 1.5?
Well, let's bring it. He says, I realize, okay, but what's up with everything being plus 1.5 runs or under? Is he looking for higher than that?
Well, I've seen a lot of overs. We had one last night. So that's why I'm not understanding the question, because, this game right now is 5-2 in the 6th. So it's probably going to go over the total. And again, unless he means 1.5, that teams are covering the run line every night, which we've seen it 10-0 Philly last night, 5-2 Houston right now in the 6th inning. He might be asking that. And that's just, listen, there's a great stat I'm going to give you right now for baseball. And I might have talked about this once, but we never talked baseball. So I'll bring it up again, because this guy's asking baseball and I didn't quite get the gist of the question. If you look at teams in the postseason that hit home runs more than their opponent in a game, they went into this championship series and both championship series, 133-23 over the last 6 or 7 years of playoffs. Now you ask then, how do you come up with which team is going to hit more home runs in that game? Well, what you look at to try to give you the best idea is to see each pitcher in that game, each starting pitcher's home run rate. And if a guy's got a bad home run rate and he's going up against a team that hits 240 home runs and his team only hits 160 throughout the course of the season, there's a good chance that that pitcher is going to get lit up. And we've seen a lot of that. I mean, Scherzer tonight, I'm watching Scherzer. I couldn't play the game. And I'm sitting there, I'm going, man, I like this over. I'm going to hold off. And I said, because I'm not sure where Scherzer's at. Guys have pitched in a month or whatever.
Yep.
And so tonight he goes up and he gives up 4 runs before he can blink an eye. And so, of course, I was kicking myself before I jumped on with you guys for not trusting it and playing the over and being a little bit concerned about maybe he is actually going to pitch well tonight. But I guess that's the best answer I can give you is that, listen, we've gotten into a day and age a few years ago. I blame Sparky Anderson many years ago for pitchers coming out of the game in the 4th inning, in the 5th inning, when they're still pitching well, and then going bullpen for the second half of the game. Instead of bringing in, your guy who comes in the 6th or 7th, maybe pitches 1 inning, then you've got your setup man who pitches an inning, then you got your closer. Sparky Anderson screwed everything up when it comes to this. Okay, I like Sparky, but come on. So anyway, that's what we're seeing. And we're seeing guys just shuffle in pitchers left and right. Man, if a guy gives up back-to-back base hits, but he hasn't given up more than 1 run in 5 innings, it doesn't mean he's about to fall apart, and it drives me nuts.
And they made the assumption that he wasn't a baseball guy, Rob. Can you believe that? I mean, I think there's more passion with baseball right there than college football. If you like what first of all, let's take a look at the pro football bonus again from Betfred Sports. Place a game day wager on any pro football first touchdown score, and you'll get paid out 2 times the odds in cash if your bet wins and the player scores a second touchdown. Use the promo code SCORE. And then, of course, get in on the parlay bonus when you place 9 football parlays. The 10th parlay is on Fred. Get rewarded with up to a $100 Fred bet each week of the pro football season. Please use the promo code parlay. And then, listen, you just heard Scott, and it went over my head in many cases. But if you want to work directly with Scott, text the word Doc Talk to the number 29022. You get a free $60 trial of the premium member picks from Scott, or visit docsports.com and sign up for the free 60 on the upper left-hand side of the website. Rob, any parting questions for Scott?
I am so full of information right now. I just got to go process it. The baseball stuff, that was just kind of a little mind-blowing all of a sudden. There.
Information overload is what it was.
It's Metric City. If you're a geek like me, you love baseball. Because there's like every metric you can imagine.
Good stuff. For Dr. Rob Zatechka, for Scott Spreitzer, I'm Travis Justice. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. Tell friends about it. We'll be back next week for another edition of Behind the Point Spread, presented by Betfred Sports.